Welcome to the Polgar Chess University. In this lesson, I'd like to tell you about the power of protected passed pawns. We'll start out with a simple example and then with some more complex one. Then I'll share you some ideas about the wrong color bishop and then a beautiful endgame at the end. Well, let's get started. In this endgame, White has a protected passed pawn that gives him a winning advantage, because the black king is busy guarding the advancement of this white pawn along the f-file, cannot run and protect his pawn on a5. The black king cannot cross the c-file because then it would be too far from catching the white pawn. For example, after king a2, king d6, king a3, king c6, king a4, king b6 would already be losing right away because the pawn advances. This is the basis of why a protected passed pawn is so strong, and people usually try to get one if they can, or on the other side try to avoid the opponent having it and allowing it. Well, first let me share with you one of my own games that I played at the Women's World Cup in Dresden, Germany a couple of years ago. In this position, my opponent played c5, and that was certainly a misjudgment of the position. That allowed me to create a protected passed pawn on d5. My opponent felt that with quickly doubling her rooks on the a-file and putting pressure on my isolated a2 pawn, and then pushing the two pawns on b and c files, will get good counterplay, and in the meantime my protected passed pawn is blocked by the bishop. Well, if indeed black would succeed in advancing the b and c pawns, they may get a good position, but they never really got a chance to do that. I continued with knight to d2 to get the knight guarding the c4 square so the pawn from c5 cannot safely advance. If in this position black would try to advance the b pawn, of course it's not so simple that I can take, because at first it seems that after rook b4 black forks and wins the bishop. But luckily I have a little counter trap by playing queen a6, and after rook captures the bishop, knight c4 forks, and white wins the piece back, maintaining the extra pawn. My opponent did not go for this, but simply doubled her rook along the a-file, in the meantime attacking my pawn on a2, which I advanced. And here she played rook b8, preparing again the advancement of the b pawn. And here I had to make a difficult decision, because if I want to prevent that pawn from advancing, the only way I can accomplish that is by moving my queen there. But here I naturally had to be ready for my queen to be attacked right away with the rook. And then queen c6. Now whenever one plays a move like that, where the queen has not even one move to go to, it's always a very risky adventure. So I had to make sure my queen doesn't get trapped there. And my opponent got to play b5. So I better do quickly something about that before these pawns start advancing, or my queen gets in trouble. And my next move was quite important. Played a4. Now if pawn takes pawn, again I want that c4 square for my knight, and it's also a double attack at the moment, attacking the black rook and bishop. So after a4, my opponent played rook to b6, when I luckily have one more square to go to with my queen. And after knight f8, now the queen, of course, has numerous escapes along that diagonal. Continued with pawn takes pawn, rook took back, and simply moved my bishop out of danger's way. At this point, we were getting short on time, so there were some inaccuracies on both sides. I think if I would have a second chance, I would move my queen to a6 in this position, rather than trying to create an attack on the king's side. My opponent played h6, getting rid of any back rank problems, and so did I by playing g3. My opponent played knight d7. I created a pin. Rook b7, protected. I'd be happy if now my rooks get traded on a7 and my second rook would get activated on the 7th rank, but my opponent didn't do that favor and played knight b6, creating an attack on my rook on a7. I traded rooks and created kind of a pin on the b file. Came king h7, and in this position I would prefer bishop a5 right away rather than what I did. Queen e2. The game continued with knight a4, rook captures, queen captures, and queen c4. This is one of those situations when I don't mind to trade my bishop for my opponent's knight, because we would reach a typical good knight versus bad bishop situation when the black bishop doesn't have any target, anything to attack, because there are pawns that are blocked of the same color as black's bishop. My opponent didn't trade right away, but played queen d7, king g2, making sure the queen doesn't appear on h3 or such. And here my opponent was looking for some counterplay by playing f5. And again, it's one of those situations when I needed to transform one type of advantage, the protected passed pawn, to a different one. I captured. Now black cannot recapture because the queen is busy guarding the knight. Therefore, she had to trade. Queen took back and came queen f5. Even though there is even material still, white's advantage is quite clear because the difference in the strengths of the knight and black's bishop. Came king g6 and knight e4. Knight c4 also looked like a good place for the knight, by the way. And here I was quite pleased that my opponent traded queens. It was probably better to retreat with the bishop right away. Now the bishop had to retreat anyway. And here a very important moment to switch places, move the knight and clear the e4 square for the king, while use the c4 square for the knight. King e4 and knight c4. Now the black bishop is also busy guarding the e5 pawn, therefore stayed in that diagonal. f3, g6. One of the problems that black faces in such situations is zugzwang many times. We'll get there very soon. At the moment, Black needs to get out of the upcoming fork. Played king e7. I repeated moves and just simply played h3, waiting to advance my d-pawn on time. At the moment, the black king and bishop are both busy guarding the pawn on e5, and if the bishop would move to c7, that would give me the opportunity to advance the pawn with a tempo, followed by an important move, king d5. On the other hand, I couldn't do it right away, or for example, after h5, I wouldn't like to play d6 right away and allowing the black king to get to e6. And in this position, I made a very quiet move, was a good one, h4. Now black is in complete Zugzwang. That means if black would pass, black would be doing okay, but as we know, he cannot. And if the king moves, I'll just capture the pawn, and in the game, the bishop moved. Then I was ready to advance my d-pawn and enter with my king, and my opponent resigned. Now I'd like to share with you a position where former world champion William Steinitz against Chigorin in their world championship match in Havana in 1892, long time ago, they reached this position after 25 moves. White's advantage is quite clear. White has more space, white is more active. But yet, the big question is how to make progress. And this is a typical example when white doesn't even mind to give up an exchange to create a protected passed pawn, and also, of course, to create some nice outposts and open files and diagonals. Came rook b6, a key move, and let's see what happens when black captures that. In modern games, grandmasters usually wouldn't want to capture such a rook. But the good news is that these elder games, people were more naive, they knew less, and they wanted to test it. And therefore, they are good examples to learn from. So Chigorin captured the rook. And now, some amazing squares are in white's disposal. Now, if the queen, of course, cannot move to d7 because of the immediate fork, or moving to e7, it would just step into the white bishop's attack on b4. Queen went to b7, quite a sad square for the queen. And now, while knight c5 is tempting, knight e5 is even stronger. Check, king escaped, and bishop a4, putting pressure on the c6 pawn. Now, if black would defend that with the bishop, white could just play queen d6. Therefore, after bishop a4, black played queen e7, which is close to resignation because now white could already trade queens and then capture the pawn on c6, but played even more energetically, keeping the queens on the board. And now queen c3. White wants to capture that pawn in the most optimal way. And there's nothing really black can do to save the game here. Those two bishops can hardly move. Game h6, bishop d6. And here, black decided to give up his rook for the pawn because otherwise the rook will be lost anyway after bishop captures on c6. And of course, after rook b6, bishop takes queen c6. It's not hard to imagine how the rest of the game continued. Let me share with you another very famous example that was played by Mikhail Botvinnik on the black side of this game against Lublinsky. In this position, it seems that white is in quite a good shape, having a better pawn structure, and for example, after a passive move such as bishop d6, white would play knight a4 followed by queen f2, and the c5 pawn would get in real danger, and white would have excellent winning chances. And again, learning from the old guys, as we did in the previous game, from Steinitz, by the time Botvinnik played this game, it became quite standard that it's okay to sacrifice an exchange, not even for one pawn, just for strategical advantage. And that's exactly what he did. He rather played rook d4. Now, eventually, white will have to capture on d4, but white chose the wrong way. It was best to capture it immediately, and after the c-pawn recaptures, try to position the knight right in front of the pawn on d3. As we know, the knight is the best blockading piece in chess. White instead moved knight to e2 when Botvinnik continued with bishop c8, preparing the f-pawn's advancement, and now captured with the knight. As you know, there is a theory that knights are a bit inferior than bishops, but that's only true for open type of positions, and this is a rather closed type of position when it would have been more advantageous for white to rather capture with the bishop on d4. C-pawn recaptured and the bishop retreated, and black played c5. So again, black has a beautiful protected passed pawn on d4. Now, the only correct plan for white was to try to prepare to play b4. And he could have done that by playing bishop e1 first, then pawn to a3, and doubling the two rooks on b1 and b2. But white played too passively, and you'll see what happened the rest of the game. Rook f1 and f5. If white would trade now, I think black would recapture with the pawn and create two connected passed pawns, which could be very dangerous along the d and e files. White played bishop g3, bishop d7, rook d1, and now f4, closing the position up further. Black is developing an attack by playing g5 and trying to play g4 soon after. For example, after rook b1, black would follow with h5, a3, and g4, and then bring the queen to the attack and maybe move the king out of the way and bring the rook as well, with a quite serious attack. White played g4, trying to prevent all of this, and came en passant. Bishop captured back, bishop h3, rook f2, and h5. Black is playing very aggressively. h4 and rook f8. About time to bring the rook to that side of the board. Rook f4, king h1, king h7, and bishop d8. And came queen e2, queen f7. As you can see, the white rooks are not very active at all in this game, and because the position is so closed with no open files, In reality, white's material advantage has no importance. And this last move, queen d1, was a mistake that cost for sure white the game. It was a much better attempt to play bishop to e1 in this position, to get out of that f file where after queen d1, black could play queen h5. And now g4 is a very serious threat. White tried to be tricky with bishop e3, but it doesn't really help at this point. Now black already has the material balance at least. And now black created two very dangerous connected passed pawns, and in addition the white king is also in a very sensitive position. If the black bishop would get on this long diagonal, it could be almost checkmate. Came rook d1, bishop g4, with some serious threats of bishop f3, and then discover check. And then if the white rook moves away from the d file, then the d pawn would advance. White played h3, which only delayed the problems by a little bit. And after bishop f5, white resigned. A very nice example where black sacrificed purely positionally an exchange to have a protected passed pawns and better position. And let's switch the subject now to the wrong corner color. Here we are. I bet you know that if there is a bishop of an opposite color than the promotion square and you have a rook pawn, it's impossible to win. Here you see that in addition to the bishop, black has 5 of those pawns, but all of them on the same h file. That's unfortunate for black, because even though having a humongous material advantage, the game is a draw. Black cannot make progress. At best, they can create stalemate. All white needs to do is move back and forth between the g1 and h1 squares. Let's see a bit more complex situation on the same theme. In this position, again, black has the wrong color bishop to win the game. However, white needs still to achieve something. That is, to get to the corner, or at least to b1 or b2 squares. And there could be 3 attempts to accomplish that, moving the king to c3, c2, or c1. And only one of them works. Can you figure out which one? Well, obviously moving to c3 is not a great idea, because black can play bishop b3 and cut the king out of its correct route. Now the king needs to move towards the d file, and then after king b2, black simply wins. It's not good either to move the king to c1, because that would allow king b3, and again white is in a zugzwang, being forced to move to the d file, and then king b2, and black wins. On the other hand, after king c2, black is the one in zugzwang, and whether the king moves, allowing king b2, or the bishop moves and allowing king b1, white again accomplished the goal. Let's move on to another position on the same theme where black has a knight versus a bishop but is down 2 pawns. Again, it's very important to recognize that the bishop is of the wrong color. So therefore, all black would need to do is get rid of white's other pawn, the g pawn. And here, can accomplish that rather simply by giving a check and then capturing that pawn, achieving a theoretical drawn position. I remember one time I succeeded to draw with this idea against Grandmaster Chandler, which was a narrow escape. And finally, let's see a brilliancy, although it's on this very same theme. This is a position composed by von Holzhausen back in 1910. Again, the question is, how can the white king get to that corner square? It's not quite so simple. If the white king would move to c1, trying to simply walk into the corner, black would win after playing bishop to d3, stopping the white king from doing just that. And after now b4, the black king would not capture the pawn, which would allow the king b2, but would do en passant, and now black would be winning quite easily this endgame. Let's go back again to the beginning. And the only correct move is playing king c2, trying to accomplish the same, but in the meantime not allowing the black bishop to come to d3. And you'll see very shortly the big difference between the two choices. Now, if black plays bishop a2, again preventing the king from getting to b1, now after b4, of course king takes b4, king b2 is an immediate draw. But when the pawn does en passant, getting to the knight file to b3, after king b2, this is again a theoretical draw because the bishop has no way of getting out of a2. An amazing another theoretical draw, even though it's not a rook pawn, but this is still a draw. Black cannot make progress because after a king moving here, again is stalemate. Well, I hope you enjoyed this last example as well as the rest of the lesson, and hope to have you back, listen to more goodies, more ideas, more tips, how to improve your game. So long until next week.